Hello everybody! Today we're going to be learning how to sew with felt. In order to do this, we'll be following a pattern. I got this pattern for a small Stegosaurus stuffed animal off of Etsy, and we'll be learning the different types of stitches used with felt. The artist of this pattern is called Typing with T, and if you're interested in this exact pattern that we're following today, I will link it in the description below for you. So while I won't be going over exactly what is in this pattern, I will be talking about different stitches to put this pattern together. So you'll see me cutting out the template, tracing the template onto the felt that I am using, and then cutting out each individual shape. What you want to be careful for is to try and follow the pattern that you get as close as possible. Oftentimes, they have specific measurements or specific amounts to cut out of each shape, and you'll want to make sure to follow that so you can try and replicate the pattern as best as you can. In the pattern, there was some stripes on this Stegosaurus, and instead of cutting it out of my template, I realized that I was going to be sewing a little slower, and so instead of cutting the sort of curved stripes, I was just going to cut triangles, which you see here. It saved a little bit of felt, and it helped out. So these are called safety eyes, and they're one of the unique tools that we'll be using today. And if you've ever sewn a stuffed animal before, you'll know that these safety eyes are what you use to give your stuffed animals appendages like eyes, or sometimes there's claws. And they're called safety eyes because they snap in place on either side of the fabric, and they are very sturdy, and so they don't come out of the fabric very easily, which makes them safe for small children or pets. It looks a little bit like a screw, as you see here, and this sort of divot is where it goes, and then you'll hear it click in place. I have this uh, sample scrap here, and in order to install a safety eye, you're going to want to make a very small hole. You don't want to push too much fabric aside, but you do want to make sure that you can put the safety eye through. You can see me struggling here a little bit because I didn't quite make the hole large enough, and that's normal. You just want to go ahead and widen the hole to get the safety eye through, but leave it tight enough so that the safety eye doesn't just pop out. And then once it's through the fabric, you'll hear it sort of snap in place. Uh, you have this cute little eye, and then on the back, you're going to put this fastening on, and you're going to want the cup side of it to go towards the fabric, and you'll hear it snap in place a few times, and you just want to make sure that that is flush to the fabric. Okay, now that we're here, I'm going to want to add the safety eyes into our actual dinosaur. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I add the safety eyes on the right side of the dinosaur. I don't want them to both be on the same direction. I want them to be on the outsides. So what I'm going to do is I am going to face the dinosaur templates next to each other, facing each other, so I can guarantee that the safety eyes are going to be on the outside of my dinosaur. Then I'm just going to lay the stripes that I had cut out in place to see if I like them. I thought they were a little bit too big, so I just went ahead and I trimmed them a little bit. So the first thing that we're going to learn how to do is learn how to work with embroidery floss. Embroidery floss is a type of stitching material that is comprised of multiple strands of thread. So if it looks really thick right now in my hands, it's because it is. Usually embroidery floss has about 6 strands, and in order to stitch with it, you're going to want to pull it apart into multiple strands. I recommend 2 strands to start out with, or even 3 if you want a more bold stitch look on your stuffed animal. That's what I will be doing with these stripes. I will be separating this embroidery floss into 2 sections of 3 strands apiece. And I think that gives it a really nice, prominent stitch look, and you can see the different colors of the stitches. If you're not sure, you can always go ahead and lay the embroidery floss like I'm doing here over the felt to sort of compare the size. And then we're going to start with our first stitch. The first stitch we're going to learn how to do is called a running stitch. And after you thread your needle, you're going to go ahead and start from the bottom or the back of it and then pull your needle through towards the front. And you're going to leave a little bit of a tail. And then you're going to go a little ways down to make a stitch and then push it from the front to the back. And this will create a small stitch. And then from here, we're going to need to anchor it. So I'll go ahead and tie the stuff that I have on the back so I make sure the thread doesn't actually escape when I'm sewing with it. Alrighty, now that I've got that all tied up, I've snipped the end so that I don't have any stray threads, and we're going to continue with our running stitch. So our thread is in the back, and we're going to continue with this pattern of pushing the thread, pushing the needle through the fabric from the back, pulling it through, measuring a short distance away, and then pushing the needle back through. This is called a running stitch because you are running forward with your stitch and your thread every single time you make a new stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this little stripe just to show you what that would look like by going down and then back. You can see this has a very prominent handmade feel to it, and because I'm going to be sewing other stripes on, I don't need to cut this thread. I can just go ahead and move to the next stripe that I will be working with. So this is a variation of a running stitch, and this is my preferred stitch when I like to sew things on felt. And we'll be doing the same sort of similar stitch where you push the needle through both pieces of fabric, except we're going to start at the bottom of the stitch and move backwards. So if you saw what I did right there, is I actually used the needle and I went a little bit farther down where the stitch would normally end, and I started there and then I moved backwards. So we're going to do that again. I'm going to go to where I think the stitch is going to end, and then I'm going to run backwards and put my stitch in the end of the last stitch. This is a really easy way to get a very clean and machine stitched look and feel, and uh, it uses a little bit more thread in the long run, but I think it has a little bit more of a prominent appearance. So this one here is the running forward stitch, and it's very cute. It has a very handmade feel. And this right here is the running backwards stitch, where we did the same sort of loop, but in backwards. I sort of prefer that, so I'm going to go ahead and complete the rest of my stripes using this running stitch in the backwards variant, and I'm going to do that on both sides of my dinosaur. Okay, so for the second stitch that we're going to learn how to do today, it's called a blanket stitch. And you start the stitch in the same manner that you did a running stitch. You're going to push your needle through each layer of felt, starting from the bottom, and make sure it's not too close to the edge. And then you'll push your needle through, and instead of pulling the thread all the way tight, you're going to make sure there's a little bit of a loop. Take your needle and go around the outside of the loop, and then pull it through the loop, and then pull your thread tight. This creates a stitch that is very secure, and it lays a nice bit of thread along the outside of your felt as sort of a trim. So let's do it again. Let's push our needle through. We're trying to make sure that it's not too close to the edge here, and we're going to almost pull it all the way through. Take our needle, go around the outside and then through that loop, and then pull our stitch tight. This is a great stitch to use on the outside of your projects. It's a very secure stitch, so it will stay in place. It'll also help bring out the shape of the item that you want to stitch. You can see that this Stegosaurus spine is already done, and although my stitches aren't even, they sort of look like they are, and there's a very nice layer of thread on the top and around, and this sort of helps the stitch stay in place. So let's practice. This is the underside of the dinosaur, and this is a very unique piece of felt, and it looks a little strange here, but we're going to be doing the same stitch on each of these half moons that you see that I am folding over. And what this is going to do is it's going to reinforce the inside of the legs. And you have to create the structure for these legs so that you can put some stuffing in them. And it looks a little strange right now, but trust the process. This is what it looks like a little bit done, and this is the belly of the dinosaur. So these legs will be standing up, and we've used this stitch to reinforce that sort of 3D appearance. This side is the tail, and we want to make sure that it matches with our dinosaur side, so it doesn't go this way. We need the tail to match up to the tail. And I'm going to go ahead and sew that, and I'm going to continue to use this blanket stitch to do that. And I'm going to sew all around this first foot. Alrighty, so now that you see here, we've gone, and on the inside you see this half moon that we stitched, and it's made a sort of 3D cylinder that, since we've attached to the outside of our dinosaur, is going to allow us to put some stuffing and make this into a cute little fluffy foot. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to sew on the outside of this dinosaur and make sure that the belly piece is stitched all the way to both dinosaur halves. Okay, so here I have my dinosaur halves stitched to the belly piece, and you'll see at the bottom here that strange looking white piece that had all the half moons that we stitched are now attached to all their respective legs, and they are fillable with some stuffing. So here's what it looks like on the inside. And our next task is to stuff this. But if we take this polyfill and try to just stick it in this dinosaur, it's not going to stay put. So I'm going to need to sew some of the back on it first so that our stuffing will stay put, and we can stuff it properly. Alrighty, so now that we've stitched most of our dinosaur closed, we left a little bit of space so we can stuff him. We're going to take a tiny piece of polyfill, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stuff his little legs and make sure they're pretty tight. I prefer a very sturdy plush when it comes to stuffed animals, but this part is subjective. So you can use as much or as little stuffing as you like. I am using small pieces first, and I'm going to stuff the legs just to make sure that they're full. That way, when I stuff the rest of the dinosaur, the legs don't get lost in all of the stuffing. All right, now that he is stuffed, you can see he's looking a little bit chunky, and that's my favorite type of stuffed animal. I'm going to sew the rest of his head shut. And I did notice here a little bit that he needed a little bit more, so I just sort of gave him a little snack of more polyfill. And this is where we learn our third stitch. This is called a ladder stitch. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do a stitch like you were to do a running stitch, where you put your needle in and then you bring it out again. Except this time, instead of running forward on the same piece, you're going to go to a different piece. I'll show you right here. I'm going to put my needle into the fabric and then out as if I was doing a running stitch, and then I'm going to move to the bottom fabric that I need to connect and go into the fabric and out again like a running stitch. This is called a ladder stitch because you can see these horizontal stitches where it connects all together. And you'll do this down the entirety of each piece that you want to connect. And at the very end, it's very satisfying. You can pull on the thread and it will attach the pieces together. Again, I'm going in and out like a running stitch, pulling it through, and then down to the bottom, in and out, like a running stitch. And now that we're at the end of our mouth that we needed to connect, I'm just going to go ahead and pull lightly, and all those stitches disappear and the fabric connects to each other. You can go ahead and pinch this or sort of coax it into whatever shape that you want it to be. And this is also a great stitch to attach two pieces that are separated entirely. I'm attaching the spines here. You can see I've done most of it already. And right now I'm using the holes that I created already from stitching around the body. And this is perfectly fine. Those are reinforced by other thread, and it will allow me to space out my stitches properly. You can see me struggle here to get a good running stitch on this upper sort of spine, but I eventually get it to as good as it's going to be, where I go through the felt and back again, and then I am going to take a look and see if I need to stitch again on the bottom, and then I'm just going to pull it tight, and there you go. That's your ladder stitch. This is a very sturdy stitch to attach two pieces together at the same time. And after you've done all of your spines, this is a great trick to hide your thread. So what you'll want to do is you'll tie off your string and you'll push it through, you'll push the needle through the stuffed animal all the way over to the other side. I'm grabbing the needle here gently to make sure I don't poke myself. And then from here, you'll have a string that attaches all the way from this side at the tail, all the way through the stuffed animal towards the front. And you can go ahead and remove your needle. And from here, you'll just sort of pull the thread a little bit tight, snip close to the base, but be careful not to snip your actual animal. And then when you adjust and pull it tight and fluff it out, you'll notice that thread is gone. So now it's somewhere in the middle of the animal, and you don't even have to worry about any loose threads. And here's your tiny little Stegosaurus. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned all the new stitches that you'll need to learn to sew your very own felt Stegosaurus.